This time on the Brothers Mysterium.
Near-Death Experiences, Part 2. We are back.
My name is Howard Storm, and I'm known for my near-death experience, which I had in 1985.
If you had someone with an NDE and someone with a hallucinogenic experience, they would both argue to their blue in the face that both of their experiences were as equally real.
He went to the dark side. He went to hell.
I said to them, I'm not going with you any further. I'm going back. Hitting and pushing and pulling, it turned into biting and tearing and clawing and ripping. And they succeeded in destroying me.
My brother and I have always been intrigued by the unexplainable. Like many, we're fascinated with stories of the supernatural, fringe science, and modern-day mysteries.
Though we've seen no first-hand proof of its existence, our minds remain open to the possibility.
Unsatisfied with the so-called evidence on television and the internet, we are choosing to take matters into our own hands and conduct our own interviews and research.
Now we're on a quest to speak with as many people as we can and hear the stories of these events from those who have lived them.
No Hollywood effects or exaggerations, and no hidden agenda. We invite you to listen and decide what and who you believe.
We are the Brothers Mysterium.
Hello and welcome to the Brothers Mysterium. As always, I am the man they call Tommy. My brother goes by Eric.
Hey, yo.
We are the Brothers Mysterium, and if you enjoy our show, we ask you take a moment to rate and review us on whatever podcast provider you use, and why not give us a like? Facebook.com/The Brothers Mysterium. Feel free to follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Mysterium Bros, and you can check out our official website, thebrothersmysterium.com.
And don't forget, if you want to see some extra videos, along with catch up on any episodes you may have missed, go to youtube.com/The Brothers Mysterium.
I was going to make a joke about catch up on episodes, but I don't like condiment jokes. Get it? Catch up?
Damn. Okay.
Rough start. Well, speaking of rough starts, how about a rough end? As in nearly dying. Near-Death Experiences, Part 2. We are back.
And we don't need to clarify too much on what a near-death experience is, because if you need that information, I suggest going back one episode to the first near-death experience episode, in which we tackle all the brass tacks, as I like to say, and we have that conversation with Daniel. So this is Part 2.
And as you know, we always get the best, most unique encounters, experts, individuals we can find. When it comes to near-death experiences, it's hard to track people down, but we were able to once again get a person with a very famous near-death experience. That is a man named Howard Storm. And this is a rarity because most research, most encounters you hear are on the positive side of things. Somebody who died, saw the light, it was great. Well, not Howard. He went to the dark side. He went to hell.
Damn straight.
And he shared his story with us.
Hello?
Hello, Howard.
Yeah.
Hey, how are you?
How are you?
Good, good. Are you set up and ready to rock?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. When it comes to near-death experiences, there is a famous occurrence I've often seen on TV and read about. So when we decided to look into NDEs and talk with those who lived through them, there was one man I really wanted to speak with.
My name is Howard Storm, and I'm known for my near-death experience, which I had in 1985, and wrote a book about it called My Descent into Death, which was published in 2000.
So let's start at the beginning. Could you kind of explain who you were, what you were doing, what your life was like before your near-death experience?
In 1985, I was a 38-year-old full professor at Northern Kentucky University. I taught art. I was an atheist, and I had been one all of my adult life. I was a very A-type personality and had a very high opinion of myself. And I was also the department head of the art department at the university. Some small power and authority associated with that position. And in June of 1985, I was on the last day of a 3-week art tour of Europe with a group of students.
And that day would be the day that Howard died.
At 11 o'clock in the morning on June 1st, I was in the hotel. We had just been to Eugene Delacroix's studio and home. We come back to go to the George Pompidou Center, and I fell to the ground with the most acute pain I'd ever experienced in my life, which happened in the center of my abdomen. My wife called the hotel desk. They called an emergency service, and a doctor arrived very shortly and got me up off the floor and onto the bed and examined me and told us that I had a perforation of the duodenum, which is the small stomach. And he called an ambulance, and he informed us that I had to have abdominal surgery immediately, and if I didn't, it would be fatal. So I was taken by ambulance to the big public city hospital in Paris called Carchat, the Hospital Général d'Assistance Publique de Paris, and taken to emergency, examined by a couple of doctors, x-rayed, medical history, and they told me the same thing the doctor had, that I had to have the surgery immediately because this situation, if it went on too long, I would become septic and it would be fatal. So I was taken to the surgical hospital, and I'm sure the doctors at emergency didn't realize that there wasn't any surgeon available at that time. So I was parked in a room, and nobody had signed for me. No doctor had signed for me in the hospital. So I was given no medication or any treatment at all when I entered the surgical hospital. After a few hours, I was quite sure that I was dying, and the pain, which had taken me to the ground, kicking and screaming, was 10 or 100 times worse, and it was quite unbearable. And at 8:30 that night, a nurse came into the room and said that they were sorry, but they were unable to locate a doctor, and they would try and get one the next day, Sunday, to do the surgery. When she left the room, I knew that it was time for me to stop struggling, because it had become extremely difficult to hang on, and said my goodbyes to my wife. She sat down in the chair next to the bed weeping, and I went unconscious, believing that I was dying.
So after saying goodbye to his wife and accepting the fact that he was dying, Howard was embraced by the darkness of unconsciousness. And that's when something unexpected happened.
I awoke from that unconsciousness, and I felt more alive and better than I'd ever felt in my entire life. Standing next to the bed that I had been in, I was delighted and surprised at how well I was doing. So I'd just gone from the worst of my life. Now I was at the best. And I felt myself all over, trying to do a reality check, and I felt quite real. And I started looking around the room, and I noticed that the bed that I had been in was now occupied by something that I was very suspicious of. And then as I examined the face of what was in my bed, it bore a remarkable resemblance to me. I knew that that couldn't be me because I was standing over it, looking at it. And you can't be two places at once. And I was quite alive, and I knew that the thing in the bed was not alive at all. And I tried to speak to my wife. She didn't respond to me at all, which made me very angry. So I turned to the roommate in the room, who was a very kind year-old Frenchman, and he didn't respond to me.
Howard!
I heard people outside the room calling me by name in English.
Come join us in the hallway, Howard.
Come here, Howard.
Which was a little surprising. And I went over to the doorway of the room, and they said, "You have to come with us. Hurry up. Let's go."
Come with us. It's time for you to go.
Come with us.
And I said, "I'm very sick. I need to have surgery. I'm waiting for a doctor." And they said, "We know all about you. We can't wait any longer. It's time for you to go. Come with us." So I left the room and went into the gray, nondescript hallway where there was a group of people standing away from the light of the room. And as I entered their company, they surrounded me and started leading me down which I thought was the hall, but it turned out to be just space. After a time, I realized that we'd been walking for a time that I couldn't get any sense of, but we'd been walking a very long time. And then the hospital was not that big, because we'd gone miles and miles and miles. And the people around me were becoming a little less friendly and a little more rude. And as we walked, I wasn't very aware of the fact that it was getting increasingly dark. More people were joining our group.
As Howard continues down the hallway, being surrounded by more and more of these nondescript people, it continues to grow darker and darker, and Howard becomes more and more frightened.
So when we got to the point where I couldn't see anything anymore and they were becoming really threatening, I said to them, "I'm not going with you any further. I'm going back," which was a bluff because I had no idea which way was what in this darkness. And they said, "Oh no, you've got to go further." And they began to pull and push at me. And I fought them vigorously, trying to get them off me. But there were a lot of them and one of me, and the more I fought, the more of them joined in, the more excited they became. And from hitting and pushing and pulling, it turned into biting and tearing and clawing and ripping, which then became really invasive. And they succeeded in destroying me, pretty much, and I'm laying on the ground of that place, unable to defend myself or to even move, physically annihilated and emotionally annihilated. And I heard a voice which seemed to be coming from my chest. And it said, "Pray to God." And I thought, I don't believe in God, I don't pray. And the voice said, "Pray to God." And I thought, I don't even know how to pray. I couldn't pray if I wanted to. And the voice said, "Pray to God." And I thought, when I was a kid and gone to Sunday school, we had learned prayers. And I started to try to remember what I had learned 30 years earlier as a little child. And I could only remember things that I'd memorized in school, but no prayers. So I was remembering things like the Pledge of Allegiance and the National Anthem and a bit of Shakespeare and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and things like that.
Just then, Howard suddenly recalled bits and pieces of the Lord's Prayer, and other random parts of prayers or sayings that contained the word God.
I just said a phrase or two. And with that, the people that were around me became very angry and were saying to me, "No one can hear you. If you don't stop, we're going to make things much worse for you."
No one can hear you.
If you don't stop, we're going to make things much worse for you.
And because it agitated them so much, it encouraged me to try and think of anything that had mention of God in it. And they kept backing off as if the prayers were absolutely unbearable to them. And in time I found that the only thing I sensed was me yelling my little God phrases at them. They had retreated way back into the darkness, so I stopped. And I began to think about my situation because I didn't have any religious or theological background in my entire adult life. What occurred to me was that somehow I had gone down the sewer pipe into the cesspool of the universe. And when I began to think about my life, which I had an unlimited amount of time to think about, it occurred to me that I had not been very successful or good at anything in my life. In my relations with my family, as an artist, a friend, teacher, everything seemed like a pretty poor experience in looking back at my life in retrospect. And I realized that the people that had attacked me were not so different than the person that I was, except they had no more inhibitions or restraints on their behavior. I didn't want to be in this place, but I thought that I was going to end up there forever. And I was in very deep despair over this when I recalled myself as a little boy sitting in a Sunday school classroom singing Jesus Loves Me. And when I recalled that, it wasn't just the words.
Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so.
But it was something that I'd had as a child, which was this belief in this wonderful guy from God called Jesus that I used to pray to, and he used to answer my prayers. So I called up to him, said, Jesus, please save me. And when I did that, a tiny light appeared in the darkness, got very bright, very rapidly, and came over me, and hands and then arms emerged out of the light, reached down and touched me. And when they touched me, all the gore and all the physical pain went away, and I was filled with his love for me. And his hands went behind my back, and he picked me up and held me tight up against him and stroked my back. So I was just weeping for joy, embraced by him, and we started to move straight up out of that world of darkness. And as we were moving, I was trying to get some semblance of composure back when I was looking at the direction we were going, and I saw that we were headed towards a world of light, like a big galaxy of light, lots of little lights moving around it. And it occurred to me that that was where God lived. It was heaven. And I thought, I'm a piece of garbage. I don't belong there. He's made a terrible mistake. And when I thought that, he stopped our progress. And he spoke to me for the first time. He said,
We don't make mistakes. You do belong here.
and I thought, how could you know that? I didn't say that. I only thought it. And he said,
I know everything you ever thought.
and then I thought, boo. There are lots of things that I thought that I don't want you to know that I thought. And when I did that, I thought of some things I didn't want him to know that I was thinking about or could think about. And he started laughing. And that put me greatly at ease that he found me amusing and wasn't ready to throw me back into the pit because of the things I was thinking about. And we began to converse. He then told me that he had some friends that he wanted me to meet, and he called out musical tones, and some other beings of light came around us, and he said that they had recorded my life and they wanted to show me my life. So we proceeded to watch my life from when I was born up until the present time. And as my life progressed, I became increasingly embarrassed about the life that I was living, because they were showing me in detail how it affected people. And it was very difficult to watch this because it's not complimentary. Because I was so self-centered and manipulative. And there were a number of times when I said, I want to see anymore, and they said, no, you've got to see this. It's important that you learn from this. So we watched the whole thing through, and I came to the conclusion that the only thing that they cared about was whether I'd been a compassionate person or not.
Jesus and the beings of light gave Howard his life review, and every experience and interaction he ever had basically boiled down to that one question. Had he been a compassionate person in life? Howard knew that this was the test that would determine his fate.
Which I had failed. And Jesus said to me,
Do you have any questions?
and I said, I have a million questions. So I proceeded to ask him everything I could think of at that time. And everything I asked him, he answered, he showed me. He took me places, and it was an incredible learning experience. And when it was over, I said, I want to go to heaven. And he said, no, you're not ready to go to heaven. So we had a big, long argument because I wanted to go to heaven very much. And he was trying to explain to me that that wasn't going to happen at that time. So when we got done with me trying to persuade him to let me go to heaven, I agreed. And when I agreed, without any transition, I was back in my body, back in the bed. And immediately, the nurse who had been in the room a half an hour earlier came back into the room and said, the doctor has now arrived at the hospital and you're going to have surgery. And they evicted my wife from the room and they prepped me for surgery. And I had that surgery at 10 o'clock that night.
The Brothers Mysterium.
Could you describe the beings that were around you in the hallway that were aggressive? Were they like just kind of people? Were they silhouettes? What exactly were you seeing?
They were people, but the hallway was like black and white. Everything in the hallway was black and white, and they were gray, kind of blended into the grayness of the surroundings. Their clothing was gray. They looked quite gray. They were male and female, all adults. And they weren't monsters or demons or anything. They were people.
And now an interesting thing is sort of later in your near-death experience, you experience a lot of what are kind of the classic NDE things, a tunnel, light at the end, a life review. But what's very fascinating is the first half of it is you're basically in hell. Have you come across and found other people that have had that type of near-death experience where it's not always, a warm light and family and a feeling of tranquility, but it's, the flip side to that?
Yes, and there's a lot of people that have had negative experiences, but there's only, to my knowledge, one researcher, and she's now dead, who wanted to study negative near-death experiences, and most researchers don't want to study them and they don't want to hear about them. So they're very, very underreported. And also, people that have had negative experiences typically don't want to talk about them because it's like so unflattering. Why would you want to talk about that you went to hell,
Right, yeah, I'm sure. So that kind of brings me to the aftermath. You had the surgery, you recovered, thankfully. Can you talk about how that experience shaped your life coming out of it, having the knowledge that you then had and everything you had gone through?
Yeah. I was the surgery was botched. So my recovery ended up being more than half a year, including major surgery back in the United States to try and repair some of the stuff that hadn't worked out in Paris. So I had a lot of time to read and think. So when I came back, I read a lot of books on religion, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and most especially the Bible and other Christian writers. And I came to understand that my experience with Jesus was in the Christian mode, and that the other religions were interesting but not necessarily relevant to what I had learned and knew. So I got very interested in going to a church, which had never been in my adult life. And when I was barely ambulatory, my wife and I went to church. And when I went there, I saw all these angels up in the ceiling of the church. And I knew that I was in the right place. So I became really active in the church. And over time, besides being an enthusiastic layperson and going through all kinds of classes and training programs, I, over a period of 3 years, came to the realization that I really felt called to go into the ministry. So in '88, I started going to seminary to study to become a ordained pastor. And the 3 years of seminary, and then in '92, I was ordained. And I've been serving as a student pastor while I was in seminary. And I've been serving churches since then. I'm serving a church now, a small church.
Very cool. So definitely had a big impact on your life and brought you closer to God.
Yeah. And I had to, unfortunately, resign my position at the university, which was a very difficult decision. But in order to serve the church full time, I couldn't do both. So I gave up my university position.
As our loyal listeners know, here on the Brothers Mysterium, we are never afraid to ask the tough questions. So I explained to Howard how many people feel like NDEs are not real. They say they're more of a hallucination, a side effect from a lack of oxygen and blood getting to the brain, or a dreamlike conscious state, meaning more a figment of Howard's imagination than a true event. With that said, I straight up asked him, how do you know that this experience took place?
Well, for a couple of reasons. One is that what I experienced was much more real in every sensory sense of the word than what I experienced in this world as reality. And so this reality is kind of like a hallucination or a dream. That world's reality. This world is like a sort of subset of an experience that we happen to be having. And people who haven't had this experience have no idea what I'm talking about. The people that have had the experience know exactly what I'm talking about, because we all feel the same way. And, well, everyone I've talked to feels the same way. And the other thing is, too, if things on a scientific basis, if a near-death experience is this physiological reaction of the brain to trauma, then it could be replicated either through drugs or oxygen deprivation or whatever, you know.
Right.
It is not. And the few people that say that they have replicated near-death experiences with like ketamine and stuff like that, they're idiots and they don't know what they're talking about and they're frauds. You know, a ketamine or PCP or LSD or, you know, sacred mushroom or whatever is not a near-death experience. There's no comparison. When I was younger and lived in San Francisco, I had the opportunity to do a number of psychedelic and other kinds of drugs. And there's no comparison between a drug trip and a near-death experience. Thirdly, near-death experiences, the thing that makes them interesting, the only thing that makes them interesting is that people's lives are changed dramatically by them. And I was around a lot of drug use in San Francisco in the 60s. I was there from 66 to 72. And I knew a lot of people that did a lot of drugs like daily use of LSD and stuff like that. And the only way that you could say their lives were transformed is that they became brain dead, lost any sense of personal hygiene, and couldn't function in society. I mean, that was their transformation by, uses of a lot of drugs. People were not enlightened and become more compassionate and, go into, helping professions.
Yeah, for sure. Those are some great points. And with that, we concluded our conversation with Howard Storm, the man who has literally been to hell and heaven and back. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you, you too. Bye-bye.
Take care. So that was Howard Storm sharing with us the story of his descent into death. The name of his book, by the way, My Descent into Death, if you want to pick that up. And very interesting story. As always, we'll kind of recap it, where June 1st, 1985, he's an art professor, an atheist. He's in Paris, school trip, horrible stomach pains, keels over, ends up needing emergency surgery. One thing I do appreciate, he's very, very brutally honest. He was not a nice guy. He did not live a good life. He doesn't really sugarcoat that at all through his story.
No, he definitely doesn't. Says was an atheist, selfish manipulator, art professor, all the things you never want to be.
Yeah, you ain't kidding. Kind of an egomaniac. But so he's laying in this hospital bed waiting, and there's all this confusion. They can't get a doctor, and that's when he says, I'm going to die. So he says goodbye to his wife.
That's a very deep moment there where he's like, I forget exactly how he worded it, but he's like, I knew then to stop struggling.
Yeah, he kind of gave in to the pain. It's like not worth fighting.
Right.
So says goodbye to his wife, which couldn't have been easy, slips into what we'll call death, which is when he suddenly awakens, the first of many NDE commonalities. He awakes with an OBE, an out-of-body experience, standing over himself, looking down, and he says, he felt himself, he felt real, he knew he was him, and he knew he was looking at something dead, and then realized it was his dead shell almost. And that's when the fun starts.
Well, and then he sees a French dude in the same room, was it?
Well, first then he's trying to get his wife's attention. She's ignoring him.
Right.
He's getting annoyed. He turns to his French roommate in the hospital there, also ignores him. And then he hears strange voices in English, mind you, not French.
Right.
Saying his name, come with us. So he leaves with them. That's when he enters the sort of gray, nondescript hallway. Everything's kind of black and white. And he says he's walking for a long time. He sort of loses all sense of time and place. But he's like, the hospital was not this big. And then as he's moving down, and this sort of, again, is another common NDE thing of the tunnel, kind of this long hallway. It's getting darker and darker.
We had said a river in some ancient cultures.
Yes.
The tunnel of light, and in this case, a hallway, which all have that similar, like I said, like not tubular in this case, but it's that one-point perspective, as I had
Exactly. And he's walking down it, and then there's sort of these people around him, and they're kind of friendly. They're all adults, he says, men and women, not demons, not monsters, but they're, don't really have a lot of features, but he knows they're humans. And as he's going further and farther, things start getting darker and darker physically, so he's having a harder time seeing, as well as the attitude of the people changing. They're getting a little more unfriendly, a little more aggressive, kind of bumping into him. It gets so bad, he starts getting frightened. He really can't see anymore, and he's feeling very threatened. These people are getting more aggressive, and he's like, I'm going to turn around and go back. He's bluffing. He said he couldn't tell where back was, didn't know where he was.
Right.
And they were like, you're not leaving. You got to keep going. You must go further. And then he says, a fight breaks out where the more he's fighting against this, the more creatures, humanoids, that are grabbing him. The more he struggles, the more violent they get, until he says they destroyed him physically and emotionally. He was annihilated. They kind of clawed and ripped and tore him apart. The more he fought, the more frenzied they got. And that's when he hears this voice from inside his chest. He described it, say, pray to God, where he has the great response, I don't believe in God. And it says it again. And he's like, I don't even know how to pray. And it just keeps saying it. So then he goes through his mind, trying to remember. He remembers like the Gettysburg Address.
Yeah, the Pledge of Allegiance.
He remembers basically everything except like a single prayer. And then it hits him, the Lord's Prayer. He starts saying whatever he can from that and realizes that these humanoid people don't like it. They're backing off. They're getting kind of scared. So he just starts thinking of any God phrases he can. He's throwing those out. They're getting angry. They're yelling, no one can hear you. But he doesn't stop. And then eventually they all kind of spread away into the darkness. And that's when he says, he kind of realized, I don't think he said the word hell, but he said he suddenly realized he was in a bad place.
Yeah.
And he was a bad person.
Right.
He's kind of in despair. And then he's struck with kind of a random two things that I thought were interesting. One is he says all those people that were attacking him, he's like, they're basically like me. Like, these are people, but they're evil people.
Right.
They're kind of like him with no inhibitions at all. Like, if he had no restraint, he was just kind of running wild and hurting people or whatever.
These darker faces that he wore at some point in his life were now speaking and physically
attacking him,
pulling him in and kind of dragging him back into his past ways, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
almost.
and I really just love the fact that he didn't say it wasn't demons, it wasn't monsters, it wasn't some kind of creatures. He's like, these were evil humans, like dark souls or something. And that's when he has this memory of himself in Sunday school singing Jesus Loves Me, remembering as a young kid his deep connection and love for Jesus. So he just says, Jesus, please save me. And that's when we get another commonality, the tunnel, especially here, where a little pinhole of light that comes closer, closer, closer. It kind of envelops him. He feels like two hands come out, reach down, hug him. And he says instantly all the pain is gone. His destroyed body that's been ravaged heals. He feels amazing.
Which had been ravaged by
these evil souls.
The evil spirits. Because he did say, which I think we failed to mention, is that when he first begins having the NDE, he knew something was up because his pain was completely gone. And
correct.
He felt completely, the most physically fit he had ever felt in his life.
Yes.
So then he goes through this pain of being tormented by these demons that are him. And now he's prayed to Jesus. That pain is now gone. And he is on his way to the next step.
Indubitably, which is, this God or Jesus or whatever, the being of light. Another common thing is, besides just a light, is these beings of light. So this one is hugging him, it's rubbing his back, and he's like, starts again thinking of himself while this light is holding him tight. He's like kind of lifted, and it starts flying through almost like a galaxy of other lights, and he thinks he's now in heaven, and he's like, I'm a piece of garbage. I don't belong here. What have I done with my life? This is a mistake, which is when God speaks to him. And he says he did not say this out loud. It was almost like reading his thoughts.
Right.
So I don't know exactly if these were thoughts or he was hearing with his ears or how he's getting this message.
Specifically Jesus, though.
Jesus.
Yes.
Says, we don't make mistakes. You do belong here. And he's like, I didn't say that. I just thought it. And then Jesus responds, I know every thought. So then he, of course, thinks of all the evil things and embarrassing things he did he doesn't want anybody to know about. And then this being of light kind of laughs.
Jesus is like, silly mortal.
Exactly.
I heard all that you just said about me.
He's like, I already know, man.
Yeah.
And again, I just appreciate the brutal honesty of Howard where he says, he's like, I was embarrassed by everything. Then this being of light calls over other beings of light who start the life review, which is yet another common NDE.
Indeed.
And he says while he's watching that again, he's thinking, oh my God, I don't want to watch this. And they say, you have to watch it. You have to learn from this.
Right. Now I have questions about that.
Let's fire them off right now.
So the life review thing to me is interesting. And I guess in his case, it's relevant because he says he was a bad person and he was manipulative and had all these negative personality traits.
Yes.
But what if, say, you were a person who did have those traits, but had learned from them in life?
Well, people who have, like most commonly reported, are positive NDEs.
Okay.
So people will see that, and sometimes it's like a good thing. Like, it doesn't have to be a negative review. You can look back at all the people you've helped and all the good deeds you've done and how you've affected their lives.
Like, I was going to say, like, if Ebenezer Scrooge went through that whole thing with the three spirits visiting him and then had a heart attack that night, And then they're like, now you got to watch a life review of how bad you were. And he's like, yeah, but I just did this last night and I'm over it. Like,
well,
I'm good.
he would probably get a bye because he had just done it.
Right. Okay. So,
Although, well, I guess it depends. Is that angels? Is it ghosts? Who's in charge of the life review?
yeah, who's running the film?
It all depends. But yeah, they say you got to learn from this, and he sees what he did and how he affected other people's lives. And he says that his main lesson was like, I failed at being a compassionate person,
Right.
which then leads to a Q&A with Jesus, with God, where he's asking all these questions and getting these answers and being shown the answers and taken places. And then they get into a bit of an argument where Howard's like, let me stay in heaven. I want to stay here.
Which Daniel had also said.
Of
he wanted to
course,
stay
which
there.
is another common thing, right? You would think people say, I have unfinished business. I want to go back. But more than not, people say, like, this is amazing. This feeling's incredible. I don't want to leave. I want to stay here. And that's when usually you're pushed out, which is kind of what happens.
Is that one of the points in Moody's book that like hits like an NDE?
That people choose to want to stay?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe that it is.
Okay.
So they go back and forth. Can I please stay? No, not your time. You'll be back. It's not going to happen now. So he finally says, okay, I agree. And then boom. That was my own snapping sound effect.
Oh.
He wakes up back in his body. The nurse rather says, the doctor is here. You're going into surgery right now. We're prepping you. He goes, gets surgery. It kind of gets botched. He comes to the U.S.
Well, yeah, that's
does
a
like
whole separate thing.
a year or more of recovery and stuff. But it does change his whole life.
And interesting to note, originally he says it was like evening, and they said they were going to try to find a doctor for the next morning.
Yes.
And he has this whole long experience, and then I think he says the doctor ended up showing up at 10 o'clock that same night.
Correct.
So not that much time has gone by in the physical world,
Right.
where he, makes it sound like this is an eternity that he's been gone for on the other side.
You never know how time works on the other side.
No.
But yeah, it changed his life. He has, after his long recovery, he goes back to church, starts going, finds his faith again, becomes more and more active until he decides to actually leave his position at the university to become a full-time ordained pastor and commit his life solely to his church work. And then I had some follow-up questions where he had some great answers, and this is another one. He said only people who have had NDEs can really know what he's talking about, but he says this world, this reality that we live in is almost like a dream or a hallucination, because when you're dead, that's real reality. That's when you really feel things. You really know things.
Which is similar to like the Buddhist idea of like Maya, like the world of Maya, like the illusory world is the world we live in now.
Yeah, so that's an interesting perspective. And then another thing I loved is I had asked him, like, people say, oh, sometimes you see a tunnel when you're dying because you're running out of oxygen, whatever. And he said, if it's some sort of brain trauma like that, it should be able to be replicated medically by science from oxygen deprivation or with drugs,
Right.
even hallucinogenic drugs, PCP, LSD, mushrooms, ayahuasca, a lot of
DMT,
a lot
my
of
personal favorite.
different religions, people do it in their spare time and they go, oh, I had an experience, man. But he's like, he says he was in San Fran in the 60s, baby. He did it, a lot of these drugs. And he's like, it is not the same at all. He says any scientists or doctors who are like, yeah, we can make an NDE happen. You cannot. And that's true, too. Like, I'm sure people have tripped out and been like, I saw some beings of light. And they said, hey, man, be excellent to each other.
Yeah. I guess the only comparison you could make is if you've done both, because I've talked to people who have. I've never done any hallucinogenic drugs or anything like that, but I've talked to
Let's
people who
do some
have.
right now. Take this.
After this, we're gonna do some experiments. We're gonna take some hallucinogenic drugs, and then we're gonna try and get as close to killing ourselves as possible.
I was just wondering that. What if you're on PCP and then you almost die? Would you have?
Does it botch the near-death experience?
Does it ruin it or make it stronger?
Yeah, I don't know, but I feel like if you put him up against someone that only had a hallucinogenic experience, if you had someone with an NDE and someone with a hallucinogenic experience, they would both argue till they're blue in the face that both of their experiences were as equally real. So and I guess the only way you can compare it, and again, it's still biased because it's one person reporting it, is if you've done both.
Yes.
Which is a rarity.
Yeah, and it's always hard to say, like it's easy to discredit someone by saying you were drunk, you were on drugs.
Right, was he on pain medication when he was in the hospital?
Right.
You know?
You never know what kind of combinations could lead, but obviously he believes it. He is famed for this very detailed, and again, it's the rare negative side of a near-death experience. Everybody wants to go to heaven. Everybody wants grandma and grandpa there to say, hey, we love you, we're waiting for you, it's not your time. Nobody wants to go to hell. And again, I admire his courage in being like, why would anybody admit that they were a jerk in life and then tell that story? I mean, luckily, the flip side is, and this is what he says is another major point that's definitely worth mentioning, it's life-changing. And he says, I know a lot of guys that did drugs daily, and he's like, the only life change, the only transformation is they become like junkies or have bad hygiene or
Hippies.
Become dirty hippies. They don't suddenly find religion, and he dedicated his whole life to it. He gave up his university position where he had that power that he had loved so much before. So it definitely reshaped his whole life, his whole outlook, his whole theology, his whole belief system, which does carry some weight because I know a lot of people that have had crazy drug trips, but they are then the same person 2 days later.
Right. And I've known people who have had religious experiences and then have become completely overzealous and almost bad people in how pious they now think they are. So it can go that way also. So I guess, I mean, yeah, in the end, this is again one of those things where it's like there's no way to prove whether or not I can't say, you know, this definitely happened or this definitely didn't happen, but the only measurable kind of criteria we have is this profound change that it has made in his life, and that's definitely real.
Absolutely.
So that definitely throws some weight in his corner, I'd say.
I agree. So yeah, just want to thank Howard Storm again for sharing his story. Great story, detailed story, and just a very unique account. And usually we'll sort of discuss, like, do we believe in whatever paranormal subject we're talking about? I don't know if NDEs, do we believe in NDEs? I guess so. Sure.
Well, the question would
What's
be...
not to believe? Question is, did he really go to hell?
Right.
Did he really go to heaven? Did Daniel Brinkley really cross over? Or is it just that their brain dying for the time that they were near death?
Right.
Would that be the argument, I guess?
Yeah. I don't know.
And then that opens the door, too, of if Howard's experience is real, then you have to assume that a God is real. Maybe not God, maybe not Jesus. Maybe it's
what we'd have
whoever
to
formed
do.
the universe. We have many names for many religions, but some being of light or several beings of light are doing something on the other side.
We'd almost have to, for the first time ever, hold an interview with someone who is not an experiencer of something paranormal, which is talk to like an end-of-life doctor, like a hospice doctor or something like that, and get
their
perspective on what usually takes place when someone is on their way out. What does that person usually experience, and what medically is happening in their brain? Although those people usually don't come back, so I guess it would be different.
And I guess, I mean, that's an interesting concept. My thing is, so for example, Howard, he might have just closed his eyes and then laid there, and then even if he was like, say, brain dead for 4 minutes or something, or his heart stopped, and then he came back, we couldn't say whether or not he actually went. Like, we don't know if he could have been, his soul could have been gone for what felt like eons to him.
Right.
But the doctor would be like, well, he just lay there with his eyes shut.
Yeah.
Like, what would the doctor tell us, I guess, would be my question.
Right. Or what did his wife see? Because she was in the room, technically, when all this was
But did
going
she
down.
see anything? Did she just jump up and go like, oh my God?
Did he close his eyes for a minute? And
Right.
Yeah.
Like we already said, to him, he's walking down this hallway forever. Then he's in hell getting attacked. Then he's been brought up to this galaxy-type heaven. Then he's doing his life review.
You almost need like a trip sitter for the near-death experience.
Yeah.
Like someone who's there monitoring you as you're having, but there's no way to predict.
Right. When someone will be near death. That's the the trouble with trying to do real hard science on this.
Right, because we can't just go fill up the bathtub and drop a toaster in it right now and hope for the best.
No, and it's like it comes down to like how do you can like we know some people have died, they've been dead legally and come back.
Right,
but there's and you can measure their brain waves and their heart rate, but you can't measure like the consciousness or their soul to be like, yep, the soul level is 0, the soul is gone, and then
there was that one experiment.
The soul is back.
There was that one experiment that the guy did where he weighed people while they were dying.
Yes, that is the 21 grams experiment. In 1907, Duncan McDougall, a physician from Massachusetts, had theorized that souls have physical weight and attempted to measure the mass lost by a human when the soul departed the body, saying 21 grams was the weight difference of a soul leaving. But that's kind of, I don't know if I believe that. Yeah, so no proof there, but yeah. So I don't know. I know that NDEs are definitely one of the more intriguing topics we can discuss. It's obviously very hard to find people who've had them, or at least had ones this vivid and intense. But I do love hearing their tales and discussing them as we're doing now.
Yeah, definitely. That's the name of the game.
It's an interesting topic, and when dealing with ghosts and the other side, near death is as near to death as you can get without being dead.
For sure.
The Brothers Mysterium.
The music heard in this episode comes from, first, the French song, When Howard Was in Paris, is titled Jazz in Paris, and the artist is Media Rights Productions. Jesus Loves Me, the children's song, came from Brian Doran. Shout out to the voice talent in this episode, Honor Freiberg, Chris Marabito, and Luscious Johnny, a.k.a. John Farrell, a.k.a. Cool Jesus. A huge thank you to Howard Storm. If you want to learn more about Howard, check out his book, My Descent into Death, A Second Chance at Life, available on Amazon and wherever books are available. Do bookstores still exist? I don't know. Our theme song is by The Never Grin. If you haven't yet, we ask you to please rate and review us on whatever podcast provider you are using. For more of The Brothers Mysterium, you can go to facebook.com/The Brothers Mysterium. Give us a like. You can give us a follow at Mysterium Bros on both the Twitter and Instagram. YouTube.com/The Brothers Mysterium has episodes as well as some bonus video content. And you can go to thebrothersmysterium.com, our home base for things brotherly and mysteriumly. And if you have a story you want to share with us or a topic you want us to discuss, you can message us through any of those social media networking ways or email us at thebrothersmysterium@gmail.com. And as always, we'd like to thank you for listening to us.